Sogavare's standpoint, Malaita Province is kind of a troublemaker province for him.
Well, what has transpired really showed that thinking, which is he finally. I've been following his public views about what is happening. Finally, in the last meeting of Parliament, he mentioned the Premier of Malaita Province. In the past, he always used other Malaitan leaders within the government, his Deputy Prime Minister and others, to deal with Malaita in terms of government policy. But now, recently, it's interesting. It's an interesting development that now saw him actually use the November riot, and then pin down that whole episode on Malaita and especially the Malaita Premier. He has not used to that. He has not, in the past, I have not heard him mentioning Premier of Malaita Province. He would talk and use other languages that would generalize everything. But then I've observed that the latest discussion that he had on the floor of Parliament, he actually mentioned the Premier of Malaita Province. So that's quite an interesting revelation in my view, and one would have to look closely why he ended up now taking tough and even pinpointing people like the Premier of Malaita Province.
Well, so Sogavare, backed potentially by, at a minimum, Chinese-trained security forces, potentially Chinese security forces themselves, that seems like a very powerful enemy to make.
Yeah, because I've said, because of this secretiveness of things, and there is no other institutions or people within Solomon Islands that can investigate or make investigative analysis of these things. It's very difficult for most people of Solomon Islands to understand what's going on. The only thing they understand is when you hear about China, most people will be quite concerned that because of the practice of the Chinese people in the Solomons, they have related that practice to the state of China. The no-care attitude, paying people that wages. Those relationships are actually reflective. People use those relationships to reflect how it would be under the Chinese, under the new friendships way of doing things.
Do you think that, you mentioned that Sogavare had taken a trip to Beijing. Is there more of an effort among, Chinese officials to cultivate Sogavare, and not just him, but are there other politicians in the Solomon Islands that they're trying to kind of get on their side?
Yeah, sure. If we have to see what has happened after the motion of no confidence that was taken against Sogavare by the leader of opposition, when the motion was defeated, it was the Chinese money that they were giving it was openly given to members of the government side, 250,000 Solomon dollars, under what is known in the Solomon as the Rural Constituency Development Fund. But the money comes from China through the Prime Minister's office. So it is not difficult to see how the Chinese have influenced or try to influence and try to captured actually our leaders for their interest. So it's very obvious in that regard. And even before Sogavare went to Beijing, it was known in the corridors of the Prime Minister's office when I was there. There was conversation from then the the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, who have offered Sogavare to go to Washington to deal with matters of bilateral relations. And Sogavare agreed, but then ended up in Beijing. So you would likely see, you can make your own conclusion why he acted the way he acted in regards to the relationship with others and his relationship with the new friend.
Well, it is interesting that I guess the Trump administration tried to make some kind of connection with Sogavare's government. But I guess the big reason China has been able to expand its influence so much in the Solomon Islands is because over the past several decades, the West hasn't been a presence in the Solomon Islands. And I know in particular you have criticized Australia's foreign policy as it relates to the Solomon Islands. What mistakes do you think have been made?
The view that I shared in the article that I've wrote is pretty much the idea of believing in the central system. The Australians, of course, they have done pretty well in looking after us, but the concentration of support through a centralized government system that have failed the Solomon Islands, it would be better if Australia would have expanded its relationship with other players within Solomon Islands at the provincial level, maybe, or even the churches, or even the communities, and to empower people to see, what democracy is, how these things interacted. But so far, what has happened is, and there was an opportunity, as I had mentioned earlier, opportunity under the Townsville's agreement, that document actually, in a way, put forward the issues that, if you address, would address a lot of issues in the Solomon, especially with Borokanal Malaita Province. But apart from other parts of the document that was addressed, the fundamental issue of economy, of economic empowerment, and the division of political power within the society of Solomon Islands has not been addressed. And we keep on relying on a centralized system that has failed Solomon Islands because of the nature of the society. The society is a very heterogeneous we are Melanesians, but when you're in the Solomons, you really know there's a lot of difference. And by nature, geographically, we are an island. Our islandness played into these matters just because I'm from Malaita Province. Because of the island of Malaita Province, I belong to this place, and I know other people belong to other islands. So those dynamics, I suppose, would have been a platform to discuss much more, open discussion about where to go, and to able to listen to other players in the Solomon, other voices in the Solomon that have raised these matters, other than just the government. So I think that's the premises that I come from in terms of echoing the view that Australia, although have done a lot Solomon Islands, it would be even better to see into other spaces in the Solomon that could be supported, so that what we call democracy can be expanded, and people to realize that this is it. We can be empowered like this, so we can make proper decisions about our leaders, our system of government, and responsible ones. I think that's what I was trying to sort of put forward in terms of that argument to do with Australia's foreign policy in Solomon Islands.
So you're saying Australia supports the central leadership in Prime Minister Sogavare's government, but Australia is not actually supporting democracy in the Solomon Islands.
If you look at it in an indirect way, it could be true. Like, you support a regime that its practice is not very democratic. Now, how do we believe in that kind of leadership and keep on hoping that through your support, there would be a trickle-down effect to the people that, this is how it should be. So what I'm saying is, if you observe that there are people within the government, in this case Sogavare, have captured the system for themselves, how do we address this? It could be useful to look at other power within the Solomons, in terms of the provincial governments, in terms of the churches, in terms of the tribal people in the Solomons. How do we engage with them so that the discussion about democracy and democratic rights and all that can be expanded, rather than believing in a centralized government that has not had that conversation with its people for a long time?
The U.S. is about to reopen a consulate in the Solomons for the first time in a few decades, and they recently sent an envoy to the Solomons as well. What advice would you give the U.S. government in terms of dealing with the Solomon Islands, similar to what you've said about Australia?
So it's a very interesting time in the Solomon, especially with the U.S. If you know, the U.S. have supported the Solomon Islands so far after the switch was made. I think the discussion started way before that, and there was a project under the USAID or USAID at a $25 million US support that goes direct to the Malaita Province. Now, people have different views about this thing. Like, you're supporting Malaita Province, and, they have the assumption that, Malaita Province will be strengthened and do this and that. But when you go back, and as I've said, this is what Malaita Province needs proper support and proper dialogue as approved by the national government, but the discussion need to happen to empower those people at the provincial level as well. So that's what the Americans have done, and I think they will see to it and help with other provinces as well. Because the governance of Solomon Islands is not only about the national leaders, it's also about the provincial leaders. That's why the system was set up to address those things. Then if we continue visiting Honiara all the time and expecting Honiara to have a proper conversation with these provinces, we already failed, because has not been happening since independence. So there is a need to enlarge this conversation. The donor partners should have a proper conversation with national government. Say, look, can this be addressed this way? Or we are looking at addressing this issue this way, so that that's all these sectors within Solomon Island, or the islands, or the province in Solomon Islands grow up together, or somehow has a feeling that someone, the government system is helping out in ensuring their lives are better than what they are at the moment. So that's what the Americans are doing. They have come through that arrangement whereby USAID have contracted entities within entities from the US, partnering with or even registering in the Solomons, and then delivering their support to those things directly at the provincial level, also at the national level. Some of the funding that come up to 25 millions are also directed at ensuring entities within the national level are robust to address issues of investment and trade and all that. So I think that's a good relationship that you related not only at the national level, you try to go down and relate meaningfully also at the provincial level, so that people appreciate that this is a relationship that we all being part of, rather than watching from the province that something is going on in Honiara and knowing that it will never affect our situation in the provinces.